If you've ever been completely consumed by a challenge, I'm talking about running that first half marathon or, pushing through a massive deadline at work, you know that moment. That specific point where your mind, not your body, just screams, "Stop! I'm broken. I cannot take another step." For most of us, that's it. That's the wall.
And we listen to it. That inner voice is so persuasive because it's basically evolutionary. It's the limbic system, that ancient part of the brain yelling, discomfort equals danger, save energy, get back to safety.
Exactly. And modern life is just so optimized for ease that we almost always listen to that warning. We assume it means we've actually failed.
We assume it's a real limit.
But what if that wall, that feeling of being 100% done, was really just psychological programming? What if when you felt totally depleted, you were actually only, say, 40% of the way there?
What? That is the aggressive central idea of our deep dive today. We're getting into David Goggins' memoir, Can't Hurt Me, Master Your Mind and Defy the Odds. And it is brutally honest.
Okay, let's unpack this blueprint then. Because Goggins himself, he rejects the whole self-help label. This book is not about affirmations or finding balance.
No, not at all. It's a roadmap. It's a systematic guide for mental warfare. It's about how to tactically dominate your own mind when fear and comfort and self-doubt are trying to take over.
So our mission today is really to get past the motivational sound bites you see online. We want to grasp the actual mechanisms of his blueprint.
Right. The repeatable methods, the psychological tools he built to transform himself from a place of, severe trauma and personal failure to becoming a Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, and one of the world's most elite endurance athletes.
We are dissecting the Goggins blueprint for extreme mental resilience. We're looking at how trauma, when you combine it with relentless discipline, doesn't just let you survive. It can actively forge an elite mindset.
And to really understand the gravity of this, you have to start where he started, at the absolute bottom.
That's the key, isn't it? The whole philosophy, its impact is tied directly to his starting point. This isn't a story of a high performer finding an extra 5%.
No, it's a total rebuild from the ground up.
Yeah.
It's what proves his core message, which is something like, your past does not define your ceiling.
The context is everything.
It is. If he started from a better place, his achievements would still be amazing. But because he came from such a deep, deep deficit, physically, academically, psychologically, the lessons he teaches, they land with this undeniable force. He's his own proof of concept.
So let's detail that starting line. His childhood, it was just marked by relentless trauma. We're talking about a home defined by violence.
It was a cocktail of just the worst stressors you can imagine, all compounded. A child in that environment feels a constant physical and emotional threat.
And it wasn't just that. It was severe poverty, dealing with systemic racism, and struggling with these significant undiagnosed learning disabilities.
Right. And that combination, it doesn't just make life hard. It actively teaches you that you're powerless, that you're worthless. The outside world is constantly confirming this internal belief that you're weak or that you're incapable.
And that trauma, it didn't just disappear. It created this inertia that defined his young adulthood. The book details this quagmire he was in. He was directionless, deeply unhappy.
And physically in a terrible place. He was close to 300 pounds, medically obese.
Working a dead-end job as an exterminator, which he hated.
Now think about the psychological weight of that. You hate your job, your body is failing, you have no future. The brain actually works to keep you in that miserable comfort zone. It's a strange kind of homeostasis.
To an outsider, the idea of that person becoming a Navy SEAL would seem
impossible, not just difficult, genuinely impossible, because the negative stories he believed about himself had become his entire identity.
That's the key insight here, I think. The first hurdle wasn't even physical. It wasn't just losing the weight. It was overcoming the psychological weight of accepting that unhappy reality as permanent. That acceptance is the real enemy.
And that's what makes this origin story so powerful. It forces you, the listener, to look at your own inertia, whatever it is, and ask a hard question.
Am I still operating on a path dictated by my past?
Or am I just limited by the negative stories I've chosen to believe about myself because of that past? Goggins' life at that point was a textbook example of those self-limiting stories made real.
So how does an unhappy, obese exterminator become one of the most mentally tough people on the planet? The source material points to one specific catalyst.
He was watching a documentary on TV about Navy SEAL training. But this wasn't just a casual, oh, that looks cool.
No, this was an ignition point. It was a radical internal shift. And it was driven by, profound self-disgust, desperation.
Exactly. He wasn't looking for inspiration. He was looking for a complete identity overhaul. The goal wasn't just to join the military. It was to find the absolute hardest thing he could possibly do to prove to himself that he wasn't the sum of his trauma.
And the transformation that followed was immediate and, well, brutal. He had to lose over 100 pounds in just a few months to even meet the minimum physical standard to apply.
And he did it by applying the extreme discipline that would become his trademark. The book details it. An extreme caloric deficit while training 3 times a day.
3 times a day?
Yeah. An hour of cardio before his exterminator shift, then weights, then another cardio session later. This level of intentional self-imposed suffering was the very beginning of callousing the mind, which we'll get into.
That detail is so important. It wasn't a gradual lifestyle change. It was a shock and awe campaign against his own body and mind. He was proving right from day one that his will was stronger than his comfort zone.
And that physical change was just the ticket to get in the door. The real test came during SEAL training, especially Hell Week. He had to endure that, but then he also had setbacks with injuries, had to go through it multiple times.
Then he completed Army Ranger School on top of that, constantly battling pain, injury, and just the sheer mental difficulty of it all.
And what he did after his military career is what really reveals his mindset. This is when he started testing his limits outside of any required structure.
Right. He transitioned into being an elite endurance athlete. Not just doing it, but dominating, running 100 and 200-mile races.
And setting the world record for pull-ups in 24 hours. And here's the kicker. He did all of this while battling chronic, persistent injuries. It proved the mind was in charge.
That transition really shows that the military training, it was a means to an end, not the end itself. The ultramarathons became his new laboratory for mental toughness.
He systematically replaced the narrative of the traumatized, directionless kid with a new one, a narrative of absolute capability forged in intentional suffering.
So if we take that revised core message, that you're not limited by your circumstances, only by the stories you accept about yourself, his entire origin story is the proof of concept. It sets the stage for the specific tools he developed.
The operating manual.
Exactly. Now we get into the operating manual. This is the toolkit Goggins built through decades of extreme self-experimentation. These are not abstract ideas. They're the practical, often brutal methods he used to hardwire his mind for endurance.
We're calling them the 5 pillars of the Goggins blueprint. And this is where we shift from the story of his transformation to analyzing the actual mechanism. How did he maintain performance when every biological signal screamed, quit?
Let's start with the cornerstone, the most famous one, the 40% rule. We said it before. When you feel completely broken, you're usually only 40% done. I have to admit, that still sounds reckless.
It does.
If my legs are burning and I genuinely believe I can't take another step, what psychological trick lets me believe I have 60% left in the tank?
That's where we need to dig into the underlying psychology. It's not a motivational slogan. It's an observation about human physiology and mental programming. Your mind creates these limits long before your body is actually done.
So it's the survival brain versus the conscious thinking brain at war?
Exactly. The limbic system, the emotional survival brain, is super sensitive to discomfort. Its job is to conserve energy for some future threat. So the moment a hard task triggers significant discomfort, like pain or fatigue, the limbic system pulls a huge alarm.
It says, shut down now.
Right. It interprets that physical pain as a false danger signal that demands an immediate retreat.
So the feeling of panic is real, but the physical need to stop isn't.
For the most part, yes. Research on endurance athletes shows that true catastrophic physical failure, like literally running out of metabolic fuel, is extremely rare in controlled situations. What fails first is the will.
So the conscious brain, the prefrontal cortex, just lets the limbic system's alarm win.
It allows it to override the long-term goal, like finishing the race or the project. The 40% rule is just Goggins' name for that huge gap between the psychological quit point, the false alarm, and the actual physiological alarm.
Okay, so if the 40% rule is the diagnosis, what's the treatment? How do you manage that alarm? Isn't there a risk of injury or burnout if you just ignore the pain signal?
That's the critical question. And he does acknowledge that sometimes the signal is real. But for 99% of modern challenges, it's just motivational failure. He trains his mind to reframe the pain.
How so?
Pain is explicitly designated not as the end, but as the gateway to growth. By consciously choosing to take one more step or write one more paragraph or make one more call when that alarm is blaring, you are training your conscious brain to stay in control.
Let's use a cognitive example. Say you're writing a complex report. You hit a wall at 7 p.m. Your mind says, I'm fried, the words aren't coming, I need to watch TV. That feeling is the 40% wall, just in a cognitive sense.
Exactly. And the 40% rule would demand that you force yourself to work for another 30 minutes, even if the quality isn't perfect. You're not training for quality in that moment. You're training the endurance of focus.
And that forced extension is like a workout for your willpower. If you retreat the moment you feel that cognitive pain, you just reinforce that mental governor, that internal speed limit.
The only way to disable it is by repeatedly pushing through the signal when it's loudest. You're demonstrating to your own brain that discomfort does not equal catastrophe. You're conditioning a new response. This feels terrible, so I must be in exactly the right place.
Okay, so the 40% rule identifies the fake limit. Pillar 2 must be the prescription for breaking it over and over again. Callous the mind. That sounds like psychological armor plating.
It's the perfect analogy. If you do manual labor, your hands develop calluses from friction and stress. Those layers protect the soft tissue underneath, so you can handle pressure that would tear up a soft hand.
And Goggins argues the mind has to be hardened the exact same way, through controlled, intentional suffering.
Which means the opposite has to be true. If you constantly avoid friction, your mental state stays soft. It's prone to breaking down at the slightest hardship.
The danger of comfort. That's central to his whole philosophy. If your life is always optimized for ease, instant gratification, perfect temperatures, no conflict, you're actively building a soft mind.
And that mind will collapse instantly when real, unpredictable pressure shows up because it has no reference point for enduring stress. It lacks mental calluses.
So that brings us to intentional hardship. He doesn't just wait for stress, he actively seeks it out. The book mentions things like routine cold exposure or doing these insane workouts or taking on hard mental challenges. Why does he mandate this constant self-imposed friction?
It's proactive psychological training. Some call it stress inoculation. By intentionally seeking out discomfort, running in the pouring rain, jumping in freezing water, he's training his nervous system to stay calm and functional while under pressure.
So when a truly chaotic, high-stakes event happens in real life,
his mind doesn't panic and demand retreat because it's been there before in a controlled setting. It's a way to reduce your emotional reaction to pain.
I see the connection now. There's passive resilience, which is just how you react to a bad day. And then there's active resilience, which is what he does. He chooses to step into the fire to build resistance.
You can think of it like a psychological immune system. You strengthen your physical immune system with low-level exposure to threats. You strengthen your mental fortitude the same way with controlled, intentional stress. That callus ensures that when a major life blow hits, losing a job, a big personal failure, your mind doesn't just splinter.
It has the endurance to stay functional because it has practiced being uncomfortable. He argues if you're not actively uncomfortable, you are, in fact, regressing.
You're getting weaker.
Okay, so the first two pillars deal with endurance and grit. This third pillar, the accountability mirror, this shifts the focus entirely to radical self-honesty. This sounds like it might be even more painful than the ultramarathons.
It's the foundation of self-mastery because it kills self-deception. He describes a very specific physical practice. You stand in front of a mirror every day and you confront yourself honestly.
And the rule is absolute. No excuses, no lies, just brutal self-truth.
Exactly. We spend so much of our lives projecting an image outwards, and maybe more dangerously. We create these comforting stories inside our own heads about why we failed. This practice just rips that mask off.
It's a daily, quantified self-confrontation.
And what makes it so transformative is that it's structured. You're supposed to write your goals on sticky notes, and right under them, list the specific weaknesses or excuses that are holding you back. It forces you to answer these really uncomfortable questions.
Like, where did I avoid pain today? Or what did I procrastinate on because I was afraid of failing?
Or the big one, what am I genuinely afraid to face in my life right now? Because that avoidance is the comfortable, invisible barrier to all growth.
It's so much easier to blame the system or a lack of opportunity than to just admit, I'm afraid to start. So if you admit you're weak at public speaking, the next step becomes mandatory. You have to go sign up to give a talk.
Right. If you avoid the admission, you get to avoid the change. And this links directly to what he calls radical ownership. This daily, unflinching self-confrontation, it builds your internal power by systematically killing your ability to blame anyone else, your boss, the economy, your childhood.
If you look yourself in the eye and admit, I failed today because I was lazy, or I'm weak because I chose comfort, you seize control. Blame keeps you powerless. Ownership, as painful as it is, creates the freedom to act.
So the accountability mirror is a tool for continuous, honest data collection on yourself, with all the emotion stripped out. It ensures you never get stuck in self-deception.
You're turning these vague weaknesses and excuses into concrete, actionable items that have to be addressed tomorrow.
And he emphasizes covering the mirror with these sticky notes. It's not just a thought process. It's an external, visual reminder of the war you're fighting against your own inertia. You can't ignore the goal or the failure when it's literally staring you in the face.
Okay, pillar 4. This one has a pretty intense name. Taking souls. We need to clarify right away, this is not about harming or degrading other people.
Not at all. It's a psychological concept he picked up in a highly competitive environment. Taking souls is about outworking expectations. It's his mechanism for overcoming self-doubt and external critics through relentless, disciplined action that leaves no room for debate.
Let's go back to his initial transformation. Here he is, a formerly obese man with a learning disability trying to become a Navy SEAL. He's competing against these young, physically perfect guys.
He was surrounded by doubters, including his own inner voice. People who doubted his ability, his intelligence, his right to even be there.
So his disciplined action, his persistence, his ability to suffer silently and just keep succeeding, that became his response. When people doubt you, your excellence under pressure becomes a form of psychological dominance over the story they tried to write for you.
He proved his worth by objective, measurable fact. He didn't argue, he didn't defend himself, he just performed.
And that creates this unique kind of self-assurance. It's not about dominating a person, it's about dominating the expectation of failure. When everyone expects you to break and you just keep going, it shatters their confidence in your weakness.
It shatters their souls, as he puts it. And most importantly, it permanently shatters your own self-doubt.
So for a listener, how does this apply outside of the military? Let's say you're in a competitive work environment. You've got a critic, someone who thinks you're too inexperienced to handle a big project.
Taking souls in that context isn't about insulting them. It's about delivering a flawless result, under pressure, on time, without complaining, and then immediately asking for the next, harder challenge. Your disciplined action proves the critic was just objectively wrong.
It's the ultimate expression of his philosophy, isn't it? Let your results do the talking. Don't waste energy arguing with critics or negotiating with weakness. Put all that energy into action, into endurance, until your performance is so undeniable that it silences every negative voice.
Especially the one inside your own head.
We've seen suffering come up in every pillar, but pillar 5 elevates it to a complete philosophy. Suffering as a teacher. This is where he really diverges from mainstream self-help.
Radically. Mainstream self-help often promotes comfort, self-care, finding balance. Goggins sees comfort not as a reward, but as the main thing holding back human potential. He rejects balance when it's just an excuse to avoid necessary hardship.
So he frames suffering not as a bad thing that happens to you, but as a necessary curriculum, a teacher that reveals fundamental truths about yourself.
And the reason it's so necessary is because it reveals who you really are under stress. When life is easy, you're on autopilot. You never know your true breaking points.
Suffering strips away the social mask, the comfortable stories you tell yourself. It forces you to see how you react when your resources are gone, your body is screaming, and failure looks certain.
It's a psychological trial by fire. You find out if the discipline you tried to build with the accountability mirror actually holds up, or if you just retreat and start negotiating with weakness again. It's the ultimate test.
This sounds very stoic. The Stoics practice negative visualization, preparing for the worst, to inoculate themselves against bad luck.
It's a very similar idea. Goggins just applies it physically. He voluntarily puts himself in difficult situations so that when life inevitably throws hardship his way, he's already prepared. He transforms pain from an obstacle that happens to him into a mechanism that builds him.
And because he started from such a place of trauma, he understood that the energy of pain and hardship, it can be harnessed as fuel, but only if you choose to own it.
It completely shifts your relationship with hardship. Hardship is no longer a sign of failure. It becomes the raw material for your future success. The takeaway is simple. If you're always seeking ease, you are actively choosing to stagnate. Growth requires stress. It requires tension. It requires friction. And Goggins argues that actively seeking out that friction is the only path to real self-mastery.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time digging into the philosophy and the extreme methods. Now we need to synthesize this. How do we take a philosophy that involves running 100 miles and apply it to a professional deadline, or a relationship challenge, or even just studying for an exam?
We have to extract the universal principles. We distill the mental warfare into clear, applicable lessons about discipline and responsibility that are relevant whether you're aiming for a promotion or just trying to get out of bed earlier.
The first big lesson seems to be understanding the trap of motivation. So many people wait to feel excited or inspired before they start something hard. Goggins just completely rejects this.
He rejects it because motivation is an emotion. It's unreliable, it's fleeting, and it depends on outside factors, like if you had a good night's sleep. If you rely on feeling inspired to do hard work, you are guaranteed to fail the moment that emotional high is gone.
Motivation is a fair weather friend.
Exactly. So the permanent solution has to be discipline. Discipline is the system that works, even when motivation is zero.
It's the commitment to action based on logic and your goals from the accountability mirror, not on how you feel in the moment.
It's showing up when you're tired, bored, doubtful, or you just don't care anymore. It's the engine that runs consistently no matter what the emotional weather looks like.
So it shifts the focus from passively waiting for a feeling to actively building a reliable system inside yourself. That sounds like real freedom, doesn't it? Freedom from having to feel good to get things done.
And it connects right back to the 40% rule. Motivation might get you to that 40% mark. Discipline is the only thing that will drag you through the other 60%.
Next up, the relationship between extreme ownership and freedom. The sticking point for most people is blaming external factors.
Right. Blaming the unfair market, a terrible boss, your background. All that does is keep you stuck and powerless. When you give away the responsibility for your failure, you also give away your power to change it. You make yourself a victim.
And this is where radical ownership is so transformative. It demands you accept full, uncomfortable responsibility for everything you can influence, even if things were genuinely unfair.
The solution is realizing that radical ownership creates ultimate freedom. When you take ownership, you stop trying to control external factors, and you focus only on the variables you can control. Your effort, your discipline, your attitude.
The freedom comes from knowing that your effort is the only thing that truly matters, and since you control your effort, you control your own path.
Look at Goggins. If he had consistently blamed his childhood trauma or the racism he faced, all of which were very real, he would have stayed an unhappy exterminator.
Yeah.
His transformation required him to take radical ownership and treat his past not as a life sentence, but as fuel.
Which brings us back to the core idea. Mental limits are not innate. They are learned behaviors, programmed by a lifetime of choosing comfort.
And they get reinforced every single time you listen to that first urge to stop. Each time you quit, you teach your brain that discomfort is, in fact, the end of the road. You build that governor stronger.
So the actionable step for anyone listening is actually pretty simple, but it's transformative. You have to push beyond the first urge to stop.
That first urge is the 40% wall showing up. It's the signal that you are now entering the zone where growth happens, where the mental calluses get formed. The moment you push through that initial resistance, you start rewriting your mind's operating system.
Whether it's a physical task or a deep mental challenge, that moment of resistance is the true starting line for change.
You're essentially training yourself to recognize that feeling of "I can't go on" as the exact crucial moment that you must go on if you really want to change. It turns a feeling of weakness into a data point that requires action.
The fourth takeaway might be the most universal and maybe the most ignored rule in this whole philosophy. Comfort is the enemy of growth.
It's a ruthless rule, but it's true. If you're comfortable, you're static. The process of growth, building muscle, learning a skill, gaining mental toughness, it all requires stress and friction. If you're not struggling, you're not changing.
That's a great self-test for anyone listening. If the task you're doing is easy or enjoyable, it's probably not changing you. Growth lives exclusively in the zone of discomfort.
Right. If you're just cruising through a project or a workout, Goggins would say you need to intentionally make it harder. You need to introduce friction until you feel that 40% threshold of discomfort.
So the only real measure of progress is the level of consistent, intentional, uncomfortable action you're taking.
You have to choose the hard path simply because it's the only one that leads anywhere new.
Okay, let's bring this all together. The memoir, Can't Hurt Me, it's a mental boot camp disguised as a life story. It's an instruction manual for psychological domination. What's the final polish on this for the listener?
The core idea is that once you systematically train your mind to endure discomfort using these 5 pillars, Your body and your circumstances have no choice but to follow. Success becomes inevitable, not because you're lucky, but because you've eliminated the only real barrier, negotiating with your own self-imposed weakness.
The book is a challenge to stop negotiating with that inner voice of comfort. Stop making excuses. Stop looking for the easy way out. And instead, start forging discipline through consistent, uncomfortable action every single day.
It's the ultimate rejection of the victim mentality, no matter how legitimate your past victimhood was. It says unequivocally, you are capable of so much more than you believe. But that capability is only unlocked if you're willing to embrace the suffering required to find it.
So the level of self-mastery Goggins achieved, it's all rooted in his recognition that the battle is always internal. The external challenges, the SEAL instructors, the ultramarathon, the pull-up record, they were just mirrors reflecting his internal state of preparation.
And for you, the listener, the application is to figure out precisely where in your life you're seeking comfort and where you need to intentionally introduce some friction. That self-imposed suffering is the exact place where your mental calluses will form.
This has been an incredibly intense deep dive. It really forces a reevaluation of our own definitions of limits, comfort, and potential. The Goggins Blueprint gives us two amazing tools to move from a life of inertia to a life of capability: the 40% rule and the accountability mirror.
These tools completely change your relationship with hardship. They demand honesty and consistent action, and together, they make sure that the only limitations you face are real physical ones, not the daily psychological negotiations that stop most people.
And we want to remind you, the listener, whether or not you adopt his most extreme methods, and very few people are going to do what he does, the core truth is still there. You are capable of far more than you currently believe.
And that belief isn't unlocked by reading a motivational poster. It's unlocked through the daily, uncomfortable grind of discipline.
So if we take this idea of suffering as a necessary teacher and we link it to the accountability mirror, we realize the most uncomfortable step is often just the confrontation itself, admitting the truth of your own weakness and your own avoidance.
That's the first real step.
So let's leave you with this provocative thought built on the Goggins Blueprint. If avoidance is the only true barrier to transformation, what is the single specific thing you are avoiding right now? That task, that conversation, that goal you keep putting off because it feels too hard or too scary or just too uncomfortable?
Think about that one specific thing. What if you treated that avoidance as your most potent fuel, the key to unlocking that other 60% you haven't accessed? What would the first step toward radical ownership look like? And how quickly would that one act change the entire story you accept about yourself? The answer, as Goggins would argue, is waiting for you just past the 40% mark.